or your thing. All right, so we're gonna get started. My name is Satjeet Kaur. I am the Executive Director for the Sikh Coalition, and I have the honor of running this presentation. Unfortunately, my co-host, our Education Director, Prithpal Kaur, got very, very sick this weekend, is not gonna be able to join today, but on behalf of the entire team at the Sikh Coalition, I just wanna thank you all again for joining our summer series. As you know, or I hope you know, we have about 35 sessions planned out for the week. This is one of them. So every morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, we have 2 sets of kids activities, and then in the afternoon, anywhere from 3 to 4 sessions for teenagers to adults. And so this is one of them. This is different than most of our other sessions where they're set up as webinars. This instead is going to be more like a training, a talk back, a conversation. We've kept the crowd, the audience limited for this one for that reason. So we will get into some discussion and Q&A near the end. All right, and with that, let me get you a little bit into goals and why we do this work. So the Sikh Coalition was founded back in 2001 when we were in a position of really reacting to a situation that was coming to us where many people did not know who Sikhs were, and there were a lot of issues of hate crime, school bullying, employment discrimination, racial profiling happening against our community. Now, most of that has not changed, unfortunately. However, the way that we react to it, the way that we can handle the situations with the systems and the institutions that we as a community have built, including the Sikh Coalition, we are able to better handle and respond to those moments where we are put in a reactive or firefighting position. That being said, there is a lot more we can do as a community to proactively change the narrative of who Sikhs are in this community. And some of that actually starts in K through 12 education. So I want you all if you know how to use the raise hand function, I'd really appreciate this. Raise your hands if you have gone to school here in the United States, to public school or private school, doesn't matter, but especially if you've been in public school and have been taught about Sikhi, have not been taught about Sikhi at all, K through 12. Like, it was never mentioned, never brought up, unless you brought it up yourself. All right, we have several people raising their hands. Okay, now raise your hand if you were taught about Sikhi, but it was grossly inaccurate. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, just a handful of people who were taught about Sikhi, but it was really inaccurate. And how many people learned about Sikhi? So put your hands down. How many people learned about Sikhi and it was really well done? Like, you were like, yes. Okay, 1. Okay, I think it's 1 person. Yeah, we need to completely flip that, right? We wanted to be in a position where almost everyone raises their hand, whether you're Sikh or not, whether there is even a Sikh in your school or not, that Sikhi is actually taught accurately. Because if people are not learning about Sikhism and the Sikh community accurately at K through 12, when they become decision makers, when they are running for office, when they are leading at medical facilities, administrators, wherever they may be, wherever you may be, if you don't know about a certain population, you can't actually be inclusive of that population. You can't think about how to appropriately accommodate those needs, right? So like, we want to actually change the script and make sure that people at a very early age are learning a more inclusive history, and that is inclusive of the Sikh community. When we say how to get Sikhi in your classrooms, we are not advocating for proselytization. We are not advocating for this idea of people getting converted into Sikhi. That is absolutely not what we're doing. We want to make sure that when you are talking about other religious groups, whether it's Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, whoever it may be, you're also talking about the world's 5th largest population. Cool. So for those that can actually see, I can see you, nod your heads along if that makes sense. Great. Okay. So the goals for today's presentations, I accidentally skipped ahead, is to understand the steps that we go through to include Sikhi. And we're going to be talking about public schools for the sake of this presentation, identify the process for your state, and then be inspired to start making some asks. And that's where we'll get into the discussion portion of this conversation. All right. So with that, so again, a couple of the challenges to address what the problems are as it relates to having Sikhi included into the classroom. This is not necessarily on how all the strategies we as an organization employ to challenge bias and bullying, but this is really about how do we get Sikhi into your classrooms. So the first is Sikhi is not actually included at any level of curriculum design in most states. And we'll get into where it is and where it isn't at this point. In a lot of situations, there's inaccurate information about Sikhism, and that's what several folks raised their hand about. So when I went to public school in the United States, the way that Sikhism, the only point that Sikhism was ever mentioned is as terrorists in response to the Indira Gandhi, in response to 1984 and the killing of Indira Gandhi. And that's the only mention of Sikhism that ever showed up in the textbook. Lack of engaging and constitutionally appropriate lesson plans. So one of the real challenges with how to bring religion into classrooms in the United States is that it has to be constitutionally appropriate. In the United States, there is a separation of church and state, and that doesn't mean that you can't talk about a religious community or talk about how communities have evolved or immigration patterns. You can, of course, talk about those things, but you have to do it in a way that it is not, again, trying to convert anyone, trying to show one community is better than another community. It's to talk about the historical patterns, roots, and how those communities have evolved and or contributed to society. So there's a way to talk about religion and religious communities, and that has to be constitutionally appropriate. And therefore, sometimes teachers don't feel comfortable talking about communities or groups that they don't know about. Again, we have to change and break that cycle, and we have to make sure that they have the competency or have the resources at hand. And then here's the other thing. You can change the law at the top, but you also have to start making the asks at the classroom level to make sure that even when the policy or the law is changed, that it actually gets enacted, right? So you have this conversation as it relates to any type of change in law, right? You can change what's on the books, but everyone needs to know how to put it into practice. And that's something that we're going to work on during today's conversation as well. And for all of those that are joining very quickly, my name is Satjeet Kaur. I'm the Sikh Coalition's Executive Director. Unfortunately, our Education Director is out sick. She got very sick this weekend and is trying to get better. But I will be leading the conversation to get us through a couple of things. One is to really understand the process of public education, so K through 12, that's what we're going to focus on in this country, and how we make sure that that is inclusive of all religious communities, including the Sikh community, and what that process will look like at different state levels, and how you all can get more involved, and what are the specific asks that you can be making. All right, so now let me just, we're gonna, as you can see here, we have a really cool animated map, and this shows that back in 2007, not a single state included Sikhi in their state standards. Since 2009 was the first victory, and that was in New Jersey, you can now see that the United States is getting colored. We're at the state level, Sikhi is now being included more and more. So what does that actually mean? Great. Okay, so hopefully you can all see exactly what is on my screen. For those that I can't see on the computer, can you nod your heads if you can see? Great. All right. So here you have, at the state level, you have a standard. And that is what creates the learning goals for all public school students. Different states have different processes, and different states have different level of detail that they go into for what that state standard looks like. And I will walk you through an example, but this is basically at the highest level what the state is saying that every school district is absolutely at bare minimum responsible for teaching. And this is potentially either the framework that they use, or this is the level of both instruction and assessment that is required. And again, every state is different. Every state has a different level of detail they go into. Every state reviews their standards at a different pace. Some take several years to review, some do it pretty quickly. Some will wait 10, 14, 15 years to review their state standards, and they will stay the same through that time. So there's no way for me to say, okay, every state is going to follow this exact process or every standard is going to look this way. It's very much controlled by the state. Now, some states say, well, it's really not up to us. Here's the basic outline, and it's a very, very basic outline. And at the school district level, the school district is responsible for curriculum. And they're going to decide what is the content of what should be taught to achieve those standards if those standards exist, or to meet those standards if it's very basic. And then they will sometimes create, again, a more detailed curriculum or framework. And some school districts will be like, it's really up to the social studies department, the teachers, or those department heads. And then you get to, for the students that are in online, then you really get into what you see in the classroom, which is the instruction and the assessment. And that's your lesson plans. That's the assignments that you get to take home, whatever essays, whatever tests you have, and it's also the assessments. All of that's included in what is instruction and assessment, or what you see at the classroom level. So oftentimes we'll call everything a lesson plan, but truly what happens at the classroom is what is the lesson plan. It is what you read, hear, understand for the 60, 90 minutes, whatever you are in for class, and they're outlined by the teachers. So let me run through a quick example of what this looks like. Shifting. All right, so we're gonna use Michigan as an example. In Michigan, we worked to correct the state standards last year. And so for the first time in Michigan, Sikhi was included in the state standards. In Michigan, it specifically says for high school world history, there are 3 other places, I believe, 2 or 3 other places where Sikhi is included, but we're just gonna use one specific one for the sake of this conversation. In high school world history and geography, standard WHG 5.12, so this is exactly where you can find it in the outline for the new Michigan state standards. When they're talking about diffusion of world religions, it's going to say evaluate the impact and diffusion of world religions and belief systems on social, political, cultural, and economic systems. And that is specifically, so the standard that is above, that is actually specifically where Sikhi is now included. So now at the school district level, or where they're deciding on the curriculum, they're going to say, okay, let's speak about Sikh immigration and communities' contributions in the diaspora. So for example, they could talk about it specifically in Michigan and California because Sikhs came to the West Coast first. Then the curriculum is going to decide at the school district level, the school district is going to decide at a curriculum level what has to be included. And then the teacher or the social studies department heads are going to design the instruction and the assessment for the classroom. And there they can use the C3 inquiry on the challenges and opportunities that Sikhs have faced in the diaspora. And that's something that we have created. So that lesson plan is already created. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions at the moment. If you have a question, if you could raise your hand and we can unmute you. All right, no questions. Clearly, I'm doing an incredible job of running through everything. Okay, Manpreet says, are you developing the content? Manpreet, can you be a little bit more specific as to what you mean by content?
Yeah, by content, I mean for the students, like what they're going to read in the textbooks. Are you going to develop that content as well?
Yes. So at the very end, I'll go through the content that we've actually developed and plans for what additionally we have developed. There's a couple of different spaces for content. Content comes in what is in the textbook. And textbooks, though, are not completely phased out, slowly are getting more and more phased out, and teachers are using other resources and other means more and more. And we have advocated, so we've gotten about 6 or 7 textbook publishers to actually change some of the content that exists about Sikhi to make it accurate and inclusive of the Sikh community, and that happened several years ago. But a lot of our efforts have actually been in designing the content that gets into the hands of teachers. So all they have to do is like print out the lesson plan and use that. It's also about working with certain frameworks. So this is the other piece of this, is some states now use a framework called the C3 framework. And the C3 framework is both similar to the state standard, so at that top level, but they also help with curriculum, and then they also have examples of lesson plans. So we have actually created lesson plans that fit into the C3 framework and sit on the C3 website, and that way teachers don't feel uncomfortable using any of those materials. So yes, there is a lot of content that is, again, constitutionally appropriate, is meant for classrooms, available for free on our website and through the C3 framework. And our goal is to constantly create more year after year, and fix textbooks as needed, or work with textbook publishers to create like video content and things like that, which we've also done in the past.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. The biggest motivation for my question was that my son, he's 4, but he's going to go into school next year onwards. And we are in Virginia, and Virginia doesn't have Sikh content built into its curriculum so far.
Yep.
So we were thinking if there's any way that we can have our hands on the content and do some home study if needed.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually share with you a little bit more that you can do in Virginia in a couple of minutes. Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, and now moving on. So here again, I just want to be really specific. Is this how this works for every state? No, it isn't. And like, this is the part that is always very challenging, because I'm the type of person that would like to just write like a game plan and be like, here, take this, and this is going to work exactly, and all you have to do is replicate it. Unfortunately, that's not how most advocacy, most of the education work in this country operates. So we have to be a little bit more creative. So just to, again, share a little bit of these challenges. So one is some states either use entirely or supplement at the state standard curriculum and or the lesson plan level, the C3 framework. So a state may say, hey, we've created standards, but we also want you to supplement using the C3 framework. So last year, when we were able to get these lesson plans, or what they're called as inquiries, into the C3 framework, it was actually really helpful because it lets us go into states where we may not have been able to go into before. Some states are like, oh, it's up to you locally, you do whatever you want. We will create guidance, but it's really up to the school district, it's up to the teachers. And then there's a lot of like supplementary things that we have to come up with sometimes, or we can address, right? Like you can create contents and examples, you can create presentations, create supplementary teacher notes. So again, like there are different ways about operating, and this is why I was hoping Prithpal, of course, would be on this presentation, so you guys, you all could become best friends with Prithpal and just use her at all times. But also just to be in a position where you can ask these very specific questions. So our email address for the education team is education@sikhcoalition.org. Whenever you have a question, feel free to ask us, and I will definitely show it at the end as well. All right, so let's go in through like what these states look like. Here's a beautiful map of the United States, and it's colored in divided into 3 different categories. So the first is any state that is either orange or striped orange means that we as an organization, or it is one of the only states, because we're the only group working on this, that has Sikhi included at the state standard level. So again, going back to that Michigan example, or going back to general examples, it will be somewhere like, hey, in grade 7, for example, explore, compare and contrast major world religions. And before it didn't include Sikhi, but now it does. So the examples will be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism. And all these religions will be included, and therefore teachers are technically required by the state to then implement that at the classroom level. Doesn't necessarily mean it always happens, because that trickle-down effect takes a while, but the idea is that they should be doing that. So any state that is orange or striped orange and blue is inclusive of that. And if you are in a state that is just blue, that means they use a C3 framework. And so though technically they don't have a state standard that includes Sikhism, they do at least use the framework or supplement with the framework, and that framework is inclusive of Sikhi as far as inquiries go that we have worked with them to create. And then if you are orange and blue, so the striped version, that means that both exist. We're both in the state standard and they supplement or use the C3 framework. So you kind of have a double whammy on how you can engage in that class, in that school district or classroom. Does this map make sense? Okay, so does anyone want to offer the state that they live in? Yeah, go ahead. Just raise your hand and then I can ask to unmute you because I can actually see you.
Florida.
Okay, so you're in Florida. Great. What part of Florida do you live in?
Orlando.
All right. Harsimrat, we're going to have lots of asks of you later this year and early next year. So Florida actually was up for review. They were supposed to start their review process this year for the social studies standards. And it's one of the states that we are actively working to advocate for Sikhi to be included in. Because of the pandemic, those deadlines and their timelines have now gotten pushed back. So Florida is a state that's grayed out. That means there's no C3 framework. That means there is no state standard that we have been able to change yet. So for you, it's really about getting to know your school district and your administrators at that school district to start making those asks and start pitching the asks. And they may not be warm to the idea just yet, but there are ways to start doing it. And so we'll get into those asks later. So that's great. You're a gray state. RFG told me he was in Colorado. And so in Colorado, you have both.
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is C3 again?
So C3 that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. C3 is a framework. So there were a bunch, a bunch of social studies teachers, administrators, people that write lots of curriculums that got together and decided that they were going to write a set of standards and framework. It's really called a framework, but basically it's a set of standards that the states can then adopt instead of having to go through the process on their own to decide what had to be taught in school districts and at this classroom level.
I was just got confused because I'm actually from Missouri. And I was just wondering, like, what would the difference be if I came from a C3 state and I went there and I did school till 2nd grade and then I moved here and I'm going in the 6th grade. So what would the difference in that?
So the difference in Missouri is that they may not actually include it, but you could go to the school and say, hey, there are these lesson plans, and if you make good relationships with your teachers, they would hopefully be willing to include it, whereas it's not as much required. Whereas if you go to Colorado,
have Sikhi standards and
exactly.
They are having C3.
And then they can use the C3 materials to supplement. Great. Anhad, I think, had a question.
I just wanted to give you a state.
Okay, go ahead.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. So again, Pennsylvania is a state that we have now been able to get Sikhi included, I believe. Let me actually just double check because I can't remember. I know on the map it's mapped out, yes, but I'm actually just triple checking because I feel like I may have accidentally done Pennsylvania in hopes that Pennsylvania is one of them. So give me a second. I'm actually just checking. Yes, I accidentally left Pennsylvania shadowed in Pennsylvania. So you just caught a mistake I made. Great, thank you. Pennsylvania, we actually have to work to advocate in.
Okay.
So again, Pennsylvania, same thing as Florida. It's a state that we need to do more work in, but Pennsylvania review process is not up anytime soon. And I'm going to make a note. I'm going to follow up with you to double check on all of that and have our education director reach out to you.
Okay.
I'm just going to make a note of that really quickly. Okay, great. Simran, and this will be the last one.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So the ones that are blue, they're supposed to be teaching about it, or
No, the ones that are blue use the C3 framework. And
okay.
the state will use the C3 framework or will supplement with the C3 framework. Ideally, we want to be in a place where they are either orange or striped orange, all states. So I'd like to be in a place where every single state is orange or striped orange and blue. That's not going to happen because some states don't even mention any religion specifically because they don't even want to have the conversation about religions. But if you live in a blue state, you can at least use the lesson plans that I'll show you at the very end of this, at the tail end of this. You can actually use those and go to your teacher and say, hey, when you're talking about world religions or you're talking about American history, here are some great lesson plans that are available on the C3 website. And you don't even have to mention the Sikh Coalition. You can literally say they're available on the C3 website, point them to the website, and advocate for them to include that to be more inclusive of the communities that are reflected in that school, including yourself.
I'm going to go to a charter school for middle school, and I was wondering, so for a charter school, would they usually have a C3 just like plan or like framework?
Charter schools and private schools don't always operate in the same way public schools do, and that's going to really depend on the state. So Arvjeet, I will follow up on what Colorado's charter schools look like. If you can do a favor, if you can do me a favor and email education@sikhcoalition.org. We put in the chat box the email, and just email the charter school and the city that and state that obviously you'll be in. We'll try to dig in a little bit deeper on what you can do in that state.
Okay, thank you.
And get more specific. Excellent. Okay, and then we're going to, I'm going to just pause. Saib, I know you have a question. I'm going to get to it at the end, so if you can just write it down. I do want to just move on because I may answer some of the questions that you all have. Okay, so again, where can people get involved and how can you help? So there is 3 different areas that generally we are working on. The first is state standards work and C3 framework. So just making sure that at the framework level, Sikhi is included. So if you live in a state where that's already done, we really don't need much from you on that end, right? It's already taken care of. We just keep watching to make sure it doesn't get removed. If you live in a state like Pennsylvania or in Florida, right, that's something that's going to come up eventually, whether it's next year or in a couple of years. And we're going to need you to rally behind and get support to help make that change. The second level is to develop and fix content. And that was a question that had come up earlier. So on that level, again, we have a couple of folks on our team working to create more content, develop content. But if you ever come across problematic content in your textbooks, in your schools, if you could flag that for us, that would always be super helpful. And this also, what we consider develop and fix content, it's also about teaching teachers about how to use content. And the last is implementing at the school level. And this is blue because this is really where your focus is going to be on. And so I'm actually going to have Saiba Kaur, who facilitated a professional development training at her high school in Connecticut, just speak for a couple of minutes to walk you through exactly what she did in Connecticut and how she, as a high school junior, was able to get Sikhi, or to get a professional development training on Sikhism. So Saiba, if we can unmute you, and there you go. And I'm gonna just pause. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second so everyone can see you. Great.
Get a nice zoom in on my face. Okay, so what kind of started my whole process was I've been in the same school system for my entire schooling, and it really started, and I've faced multiple microaggressions and I faced racism because I've grown up in a predominantly white school district. So what kind of started my efforts was I had to write an essay in my sophomore year of high school, and I ended up writing it about the lack of diversity in the curriculum and the lack of accuracy when talking about specifically India under British rule. So I wrote my essay, and that essay led me to connect with the head of the social studies department at my high school. And we ended up building a great relationship, and she became the advisor for a diversity club I ended up creating. And so that diversity club started my junior year of high school. And as part of the diversity club, we had the Sikh Coalition come in and do a professional development day. And just to kind of go into a little bit of detail with that, this was the very first student-led professional development day in my district. So I didn't even think that it would be possible. But to start with a timeline, so I found out about Sikh Coalition Professional Development Days around November. I reached out to Satjeet, and I also at the same time started talking with the advisor for my club, who was also the department chair, and we started planning for a professional development day around in February. Now, I would like to mention that I didn't have to worry about the logistics of the professional development day. I had a great relationship with my department chair, and she actually was like, you just handle the content and I'll handle all the logistics. And some of the logistics were actually really important things that I'm really lucky I didn't have to worry about. So that includes getting it even approved that a student wants to run a professional development day, getting it approved from the school board of ed that this is an appropriate topic to talk about for professional development day. So there were a lot of things that she actually handled on her end, which would have been a lot more difficult and a lot more time consuming if I had to do that on my own. But that also taught me that it's really important to kind of have a very aggressive approach when it comes to these things, because when we first started planning the development day and when I came up with the idea, it was kind of constant, like asking my department chair, is it good now? Are we ready? Are we ready to roll? Like, do we have approval? So I think that's one thing I would definitely like to point out, that it's very important that you keep trying if that's something that you want to do, if that's something you're interested in, and you don't give up if you get a no the first time. And so, yeah, so we planned the development day, and it was really great because I was able to work with Satjeet to create a presentation that targeted my school specifically. So I was able to take some content that she'd already prepared beforehand and be like, we really need this tailored to the school. And I also gave a small 5-minute talk at the professional development day where I spoke about my own experiences. And I think having that personal touch in the professional development day really helped the teachers that were there, because they were able to kind of see what I had experienced and be like, oh, this is a student who went to this school, who's been in this school district. And if this student has felt it, how many others have? Rather than just have somebody speak to you and be like, oh, these are issues. It was kind of like, it hit home for them that this was a problem that needed to be addressed. And so to kind of have the whole thing pan out, I had to submit a proposal. The proposal got approved. Then we planned the professional development day, and then it happened in February. And kind of the aftermath of it was a more opening a dialogue between teachers, opening a dialogue in our school community that allows for people to talk about microaggressions against religious minorities or just minorities in general, talking about bullying, cyberbullying. And I think one thing I would like to definitely mention is that it's hard to measure the impact of one action that you do. So if you host a professional development day, or if you host an event, sometimes it's hard to see an immediate impact, but just the fact that it's happening, or that your school is allowing it, or that your district is allowing it, or that somebody is willing to have a conversation is a win. And it doesn't seem like that because it seems like equality should be for everyone, but it is a win. So yeah.
Yeah, Saiba is really right about being very persistent. And I usually use the terms being patiently persistent, because you have to both be patient and persistent. But Saiba's like, nah, you just have to be really aggressive and keep knocking on their doors. Or in a pandemic world, keep sending emails and picking up the phone and calling them. But look, at the end of the day, right, instruction and classrooms should really be about what is important and critical for students to learn to become better citizens of the globe, of the world. And that requires individuals learning about different communities, especially those that are reflected in your schools, but it should never always be limited to that, right? So it's about coming up with the right arguments and the right talking points to really push, like, this is important. And Saiba found a really key piece. There were microaggressions happening in her school. So even though it was a predominantly white school in Connecticut and didn't have a very significant Sikh population, I think Saiba, there's like 1 or 2 other Sikh kids at the time in your school. So it's not like there were like dozens of Sikhs there. She was one of 2 Sikh families in the school district, or 3 families, and that's it. And she was still able to do that. So it is, again, about making sure that you are building relationships. And that's another key point. Saiba built a relationship with a person that was, one, amenable and interested in doing these things, but also had a little bit of power in the spaces that she was in, because she was a social studies department head, or in cases, right, principals, assistant principals, coordinators, right? Like, you're finding the right people to build those relationships with.
I think one thing I'd like to add, kind of what you just said about building relationships, is even, I think one concern that people have is, oh, I don't have a faculty member that I can go to who's in that position, or a faculty member who's interested in doing this. I think for some of the later projects I had in mind before I graduated, I wasn't necessarily working directly with my department chair, because she was like really busy. She was like revamping the curriculum and she didn't have as much time. So I would go straight to my principal. Like, I would show up. I would show up and be like, this needs to happen now. And I think it goes a lot to say about the principal we had, that he was willing to listen and willing to kind of have those discussions with me. But I think even if you don't have that faculty member, sometimes if you just really just be like persistent, like Satjeet said, it goes a long way.
Yep. Perfect. Saiba, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to quickly go back to screen sharing just so we can get to a few other things, and then we'll switch to Q&A. Okay, so you'll see on this screen, there's 4 different pictures, and I just want to give ideas and examples of different things that can happen. So the top left is a Sikh awareness presentation. So there was a community member, Ishmeet Kaur, it took her 8 years, I kid you not. But she was persistent. Her kids were going to that school district, and it was just, again, a school district that cared about how the kids were doing, but were also really worried about how it would come across if there were Sikh awareness presentations or content that was Sikh specific to, again, a predominantly white school district. And like, there was just some, like, again, tensions and just challenges around what they wanted to do there. So it took her 8 years to convince them, finally convinced them. Our team gave presentations to, I want to say it was nearly 2,000 students and teachers over the course of a year. So it was a significant number. Don't quote me on that number, but like, it was a significant number. And they've invited us to come back to the schools. So like, again, it took time, and I know no one wants to hear that, but like, Saiba's example was a couple of months. Sometimes it does take a couple of years, but change does happen. And that's why, just again, what Saiba said, like, just the fact that they were willing to do it says that there is a change happening and signifies that, right? And then you're getting, so once we did it and all that apprehension and like, the weight was lifted off their shoulders, it changed their mindsets. And now we have more of an opening to go back to that school district. And then on the top right corner is actually a training that we did for about 1,600 administrators and educators for one school district in Connecticut, in a different school district from where Saiba lives. And this was the work of a community member, Rena, who spent 2 years working with a couple of different interfaith groups, so particularly the Jewish and the Muslim communities of Connecticut, and said, we need to do more at our school districts. Like, the microaggressions, the bullying needs to be addressed. And so they had the Sikh community, Muslim community, and Jewish community do presentations during a professional development day for everyone. And then in the bottom left and the bottom right are things that people are doing in classrooms, right? So reading circles for elementary schools, getting Sikh books into libraries, right? Acknowledging Sikh Awareness Month. And these are other ways that you can do, like getting lesson plans into your classroom. So like, that's what the that's what we really want you to focus on, is like, what are the things that you feel, one, comfortable and maybe even slightly uncomfortable making the ask for, two, building long-term relationships so that you can make those long-term asks, and three, it's really about just making sure that those resources are actually available in your schools. So what are a couple of things that each of you can do? And this goes again for parents and students, right? Like everyone can make these asks, and it's just about figuring out who's the right person to ask. So if you are talking to administrators, whether it's superintendents, principals, whoever it may be, it's back to school season's about to start, right? August, September. During that time, we have an educator's guide. So it's a full packet on how to understand the needs of Sikh students and understand the history and context of the Sikh community here in the United States. So you can actually just send an email. We have a draft template available on our website. And you can say, hey, I would love to share a little bit more about the Sikh community. I have a Sikh child, or there's a large Sikh community that attends your school, or I'm a Sikh student and I play sports in your school, and I'd really like you to better understand the Sikh community. So that is something that you can do with the administrators, superintendents, principals, whoever it may be, whether you have a relationship or not, to like kind of introduce the opportunities that you could create for that school district. You can specifically ask, let's say you already have had those conversations, take it up a notch. Ask for a professional development training for the school district. Be like, we want to make sure that the school is being more inclusive. If you are focused more on elementary schools, right? You have a child that's in elementary school. We have several discussion guides and lesson plans that are specific for elementary schools. And actually this summer, we're launching our third version of the back to school packet. And in that, there's going to be 3 books that all will have discussion guides that can be used in reading circles. You can also offer to donate books to your library or your kids' classrooms that include Sikh characters. And that's a great way to, again, right? Like, how do you just build up the ask? And then for social studies, middle and high school teachers, like Saiba mentioned, find your social studies department chair or the coordinator, ask for a meeting. In the pandemic world, ask for it virtually if you're not going back to school, and share specific resources for that state and grade level. And we'll help you prepare for that meeting. We will find out exactly what state you're in, what asks you can make, what are appropriate to make. And I've sat in on meetings now where we've actually started looking at curriculums and lesson plans for that school district. And we're working on a multi-year plan to make sure that we can start adding some of the 6 specific lesson plans there. And very specifically, right, like when you're talking about different world religions, just start inserting yourself, right? Start saying, hey, I'd love to talk about Sikhi, or I'd love to share this lesson plan with you that is suitable for world history or for American history. And that way you can start, again, introducing that topic. All right, so I'm going to quickly show you our website. Let me just stop sharing. And now let me share another screen very quickly. All right, so if you go to sikhcoalition.org/to-school, you're gonna get to this part of our website. And again, I will show the link at the very end as well. This is our entire back to school toolkit. So this has everything that you need for what we've discussed, all here, all available for free. But please never hesitate to email education@sikhcoalition.org to ask your specific school district questions. So if you look here, you'll see for educators, for parents. And these are sections that you can go, and it gives you different sets of resources. So let's go to the for educators section that you can use to share resources with your educators. So here's that Sikhism educator's guide that I was talking about. It is, again, multiple pages about issues specific to the Sikh community in school. So it talks about school bullying. It talks about uniform accommodations. It talks about the lack of resources. And then it actually explains a lot of background on the Sikh community specific for teachers and administrators. So it's really for educators. And again, free of charge, print them as you will. And then we have lesson plans and teaching resources for both elementary and high school. So just going into what those look like. For elementary school kids, you'll see videos, books with lesson plans. There's going to be two more added this summer as well. And these are all books that can actually be used in classrooms, right? They have Sikh characters as some of the main characters, but nothing in it is problematic for an elementary school setting. And then there's additional books and videos that can be used at the elementary school. So this is really up to like 4th. Some may take it to 5th, but I would really go up to like about 4th grade. And then for middle and high school, again, you're gonna have lesson plans, video resources linked, articles that teachers can use, case studies, books, short stories, and then the Harvard X course, a link to the Harvard X course. And specifically what I wanna share is the C3 inquiries and the lesson plans. So if you click on the C3 inquiries list, it takes you directly to the C3 website, and it has the teaching about Sikhism through inquiry, the one that was created by C3 consultants, all available on their website. So this isn't, though the Sikh Coalition worked on this, when you share it with your teachers, you can share directly this link. And that way it's not like it's coming from the Sikh community, it's actually coming from C3. So especially if you live in a state where there's a C3 framework, this is what I would encourage you to send.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Could you possibly, I know like the previous ones you sent the the people who were presenting's name. Could you possibly put these links in the like the chat or something?
Yes, for sure. We're going to
Thank you.
send you, we'll put in the chat, and then right after this, you're going to get an email from this week, you'll get an email from our team for everyone that joined, and we'll send the links directly as well. So it'll be in your email as well. Okay?
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then in addition to that, you can go to these 2 lesson plans. So Sikh House, we'll just use this as an example. These are also lesson plans that we have created, and you can download the print version, or you can just go through this. And I know someone had asked this earlier, like, does this have links to books? It has links to essay topics. It even has ideas for discussion questions. So it is a fully curated lesson plan for teachers to use. All right. And then just very quickly want to show a couple of other things as it relates. So this is for parents, but this is actually also students should feel comfortable using any of this stuff. We have ghost written accommodation letters. So like, let's say you're having challenges with uniform policies around the star, around KISS, around Kirpan. There are ghost written letters for all of that, and also around school uniforms. And if you have any questions about that, again, you can email Education, or you can touch base with our legal team if you're facing challenges. And our legal team will behind the scenes help you. We don't need to do anything publicly, just it's a matter of being able to guide you through any problems that you're that may arise in school as it relates to uniform regulations, as it relates to, you know, sometimes other challenging things that come up. You can use this letter to ask educators to teach Sikhism in your classroom. So there's a template available here. There's a library toolkit and just more information about school bullying, all available here as well. So I just wanted to show you all of those resources so that you know where to go to get things that I had talked about a couple of times in this session. Great. All right, I'm gonna pause right now, and I know we have a couple of questions. Sahib, let's unmute you.
So, I have 2 questions. The first one is about, so basically I had asked my world geo teacher, because we were in the religions, like the topic over religions, and we were studying Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and, you know, a bunch of different religions. But Sikhism wasn't in there, so I asked her if at the end of the year I could do a presentation on Sikhism, and she had said yes, but then, as you know, COVID came along. So I wanted to ask, when school starts again, since we're going to be doing online school, is there a way we could still do it online?
Yeah, okay, can you remind me what state are you in, Saib?
Missouri.
Okay, yes, you should still make that ask of your teacher online. What grade are you in?
I'm going into 7th.
Okay, you should definitely make that ask of your teacher to do a presentation. I would also take the C3 lesson plans and I would share that with your teacher as well, and say, hey, these are some lesson plans in case you would like to use them for the world religion section, but I would still appreciate doing a presentation. And if you go to that for parent section, I'm still screen sharing. So if you go to the for parent section, if you go down here, there's presentations. For you in 7th grade, the high school presentation, which is really for middle school and high school, would work fine if you wanted to use that for the baseline for your presentation too. Okay.
Thank you. And
question?
also, another question I had is, you were talking about school uniform and accommodation with like your patka and stuff. So when I grow up, I want to join the armed forces, and as you know, they don't allow you to have a turban and beard. And I know, for example, there's like a few Sikhs who got accommodation with the help of Sikh Coalition. So if there is like, how would I go about that when I'm about to sign up for the academy?
So when you get to that stage in your life and that's the decision that you choose to make, reach out to us then. Hopefully by then policies are significantly changed and you don't actually need to seek an accommodation. Like right now, you don't actually need to do that exactly for the Army because policies have actually changed. But when you get to that stage of your life and that's the decision that you are committing to, reach out to us then.
Thank you.
Okay? Great. So Hannah, I'm just taking a quick look at your question that you chatted to us. Yeah, so okay. So Suhana's question is that they do have a mandatory diversity training day for all teachers and staff. Do you think that I should try to implement Sikh Coalition training on the same day or offer other ideas that other religious association groups could present that way too? I think you need to have a conversation with whoever's running the professional development day trainings. There's two ways of going about this. One, you could have it where the Sikh community presents alongside other communities. The second, another training that we have done, and this is actually what I had done with Zaiba, is we use the Sikh community as an example, but we talked about how classrooms need to be more inclusive and representative of religious minorities and underrepresented communities because it causes issues around bullying and microaggressions. So what I would do is I would email education before you start making that ask, and we can work with you depending on your school district. I would actually look at what type of programming they did last year, if that's publicly available, and see what's a way that we can create a training or present our training so that it is suitable for what they would like to do. But those are the two ways of doing it. You could do it alongside other religious groups, or we could do a presentation that is kind of inclusive of all groups, but really using the Sikh example to walk through the challenges. Great. Other questions? You can raise your hand or chat them, unmute. Okay.
Okay, so basically, so I'm like a college undergraduate, like freshman, but my junior year, I took AP World History, and I'm from New Jersey. So like, they actually teach Sikhism in class as well, but it's not as advanced, and it's not like they don't go into that much detail. And even in the textbook, it was like a really small portion dedicated to Sikhism. And so so I'm like already in college, but I could still try to get my school to like implement the Sikhi curriculum and the Sikhi religion in the AP World History class. Would you recommend, like, is there anything specific you would recommend me to use for high school curriculum for 11th graders?
Yep. So I would specifically go back to your teachers and be like, look, in reflection of what I learned in school, I'd actually like to recommend that because Sikhism is included in the state standards, and I believe New Jersey is also C3. Let me just double check. You think by now, this is why Prithpal was like, I'm so sorry, because she has all this memorized and I don't.
It was, I remember it was blue and orange.
Yeah, they were blue and orange. I just looked that up. C3, I would tell them that they should look at the C3, again, this lesson plan, these inquiries. They work for those grade levels. There's a middle and high school one. There's even using the United Shades of America discussion guide. So that video, the Kamal Bell episode, I would also share these 2 lesson plans with them that are on the website. Sikh Houses of Worship, and then the Stockton, California story of it. So you said world history. Yeah, I would just do the Sikh House of Worship for that one, and or anything else, right? Like you can even get specific if there were other issues that came up. Be like, hey, it would be great if you can use a Sikh example to talk about this.
Yeah.
But at least for lesson plans, I would start with the C3 inquiries and or the that for sure, and the lesson plans that are on the website.
Yeah, because I remember when we used to have like quarterly exams, like benchmarks or whatever, like basically like midterm exams, there would always be like a question about religion, and I would always mention Sikhism, and I would go in so much depth in my essay, and I would always get like good grades on those like midterm exams, and my teacher would always ask me, how do you know this much about the religion? And I was like, dude, I follow it, and I also like learned it from my grandparents and my parents. It's not something that they ever taught in the schools itself. It's something like
And what school district are you in, if you don't mind sharing?
Middlesex County.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a significant Sikh population in Middlesex County, right?
Yeah.
So it should actually be reflected.
Yeah.
Great. Other questions?
So if you don't mind me asking you, when you went to like grade school or elementary school or middle school or high school, was Sikhism implemented in the curriculum, or did you have to kind of offer it in a way?
Yeah, so I graduated high school before any of the state standards had been changed. I actually started working at the Sikh Coalition very early when some of the state standards in New Jersey and Texas were being changed. It was one of the first projects I worked on at the Sikh Coalition. So the opportunity that exists, the way that the map looks right now, did not look like that when I was graduating high school or when I was in elementary school. Absolutely not. In elementary school, I was lucky enough that my dad would come in and do presentations every now and then, and my mom would be really involved with any diversity or cultural events or anything like that that my school put together. So for the parents that are on this call, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to get involved with PTA. And if you are active in your Gurdwara, I would also volunteer, whether it's through the Khalsa school or through the Gurdwara structure, for other parents who may not feel as comfortable going into the schools, to do that for other kids. So that's something I would really encourage parents to do. When I got to high school, Sikhi was inaccurately taught. Again, the only time it was ever mentioned was characterizing us as terrorists, basically. And I came home, I came home very, very, very mad, was yelling, potentially cursing, but I won't totally admit to that, to my dad, and being like just really upset about the whole thing. And my dad's like, all right, you need to do something about it. And I was like, so I went back to my social studies teacher the next day and I asked them if we could come in and do a presentation. So I worked on a presentation and my dad helped out, and that's what we presented in world history.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can absolutely do it. Other questions? Trying to figure out, let me just stop screen sharing so I can see everyone better.
Hi, Satjeet. This is Navjot. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is great work. Thank you for all the work that the coalition has been doing for over so many years to help bring about awareness and understanding of the Sikh faith across different communities. My question is for in communities that, or in school districts or states that you've been able to make really good progress, what does that look like today, where students are being informed? What sort of awareness is being created? How is that evolving into more inclusivity and diversity for our, for the youth that belong to our faith?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say a couple of things. One, just recognize that we're really only 10 years deep in even the earliest of states, right? So like New York, New Jersey, Texas, like 10 years deep. And the change we're making at that high level, at the state level, but how it trickles down to the school districts is very, very slow. My personal reflection, having gone to school in the United States, having spent a lot of time working on state standards work now at the Sikh Coalition, and lesson plans and curriculum, is our education system is very disenfranchised. It's very scattered. It's very political, right? So a lot of political discourse is happening at the state level to decide what kids are learning and what kids aren't learning in schools. And for those reasons, I actually think it's very challenging to just rely on that top level. Like, that makes it easier because that equips you to be able to go into the school, but it's not enough. And that's why we are doing so many of these presentations over the last couple of years, to really encourage parents and students, because you have those relationships, or you can make those relationships much easier, to start making the asks and persistently asking and at times demanding for Sikhi to be inclusively taught, right? So like, that's really what we're pushing for here. What it looks like, if it's done effectively, I think it's going to be a couple of different things. One, in that moment, it creates a lot of confidence in Sikh students because they don't feel excluded or feel gone unnoticed. It also takes the burden off of Sikh students to have to explain everything themselves, right? Some students are equipped with the knowledge and the ability to do that. Some students aren't and are shy to do that. And if we can get it younger and younger and younger, especially in elementary schools, and just make it that it's normal to see Sikh faces as characters in their storybooks and things like that, you are, again, being more inclusive and normalizing the community altogether. And that's really important, right? Just like our school books need to be inclusive of all skin tones, and community backgrounds, right? Like, we should be doing that of people that are visibly different as it relates to religious minorities or underrepresented communities. So at the very minimum, and at the most, I think, as far as like how quickly you'll see the impact, it's actually the impact that it has on the students and the parents in the moment of it happening. Second is that you are actually encouraging teachers to learn more about the Sikh faith and the Sikh community, and that helps in two ways. One, it can get it so that it's happening year after year after year, the more educators learn. Two, is actually making them understand that there are needs that Sikh children may have that other students do not have, right? So like, when I was in high school, I played basketball, and I had to get a letter about why I didn't want to wear shorts or a cut sleeve, a tank top, to play basketball because of keeping of gis, right? And like, having to go to a Geniji to get that letter, like, it's like, the whole process was just honestly uncomfortable for me, right? And so like, if we actually had some of that already built into what an educator or a teacher understands, or administrators understand, you're solving that problem and not making a student feel like they have to advocate for themselves all the time in school. And then at the same token, right, when there is bias and bullying, you're empowering, again, strong educators. The hope is that these are strong and positive educators and administrators to be able to tackle those bias bullying issues on their own. And then the last, and this is like really the long term, right, is you are raising a whole generation of students to be more thoughtful, and again, inclusive of different communities. And I think this goes to the very basic level of why we have to do this work. Most people who are in decision-making positions right now never learned that that Sikhism is part of the major world religions. Like, most people that are in decision-making positions right now, if you ask them what are major world religions, Sikhism will not be on the list because it's not taught like that. So until we start shifting that, we're not going to have people, when they're checking off who needs to be at the table, being inclusive of the Sikh community to be at the table. So Navjot, I hope that answers your question about, like, I actually think it's different stages. There's some that's more immediate, and then there's some really long-term.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah. And just really quickly, like a way that I've actually seen it, like I've seen school districts start doing videos to include Sikh communities. I've seen them start changing or being more considerate about uniform policies and not having to have students advocate for them. Like there's a lot of different ways that this has come up. In the school district that we just did a professional development training in 2 years ago, again, pandemic has put a lot of things on pause, but one of the things that we have started talking about is not only how to include basic Sikh information, but they actually teach a whole class on genocide. And they want to potentially talk about the challenges that the Sikh community has faced in South Asia. They want to talk about challenges that the Sikh community has faced here, right? And like how they can be more inclusive of those things as well.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. So I would like everyone in the chat box to share with me what they plan to do after they leave this meeting over the next 2 months. Like, what is one of the actions that you plan to do? And I'm gonna reshare my screen so you can see some of the ideas that we had suggested. So just going back. Sorry, transitions are really slow. Here we go. So yes, if you can share in the chat box what you plan to do with your school or your former school or your child's school or the school that a bunch of the kids from the Gurdwara go to, whatever it may be. What's an action that you want to take up with your school district or your classroom? Great. Riaz is saying he's going to share lesson plans. Riaz, it's great to have you. And lesson plans with social studies teachers who are now friends. Great. Himani is going to work with her brother, who's currently in high school, to work on changing the AP World History curriculum. Great. The group is going to work with the school on Gurbans being allowed. Abhijit is going to donate Sikh books. Breed's going to go through the lesson plans on Sikh Coalition and then get more educated before sharing. Great. I'm glad. Yes, please share with the Sangat as well. Nadri, that's a beautiful name. Contact my history teachers in my school and ask them to incorporate Sikhism into the religious lessons. Great. These are all excellent answers. So yes, I really encourage all of you to do more along the lines of, one, getting really specific about a relationship you want to develop in your schools and what asks you're going to either make of them right now or build up to in the next couple of months to make. I think start making those donations to the libraries and to the classrooms is also great. Saib, I'll get your question really quickly right at the end. Find out who your high school, middle school social studies coordinators are and start developing a relationship with them. Those are really the people that you want to get to if you don't have a direct relationship with the teachers that are actually teaching this content. So this is excellent. And we're going to keep a running list of all of this stuff and start following up with each of you eventually as to like what you've been able to do in your classrooms. Saib, as far as like, and for anyone that asked about Gurbans, read the Gurban accommodation letter that's on the website. It's under that for parents section. Read it, but before you contact your school, especially because we are in a pandemic right now and not everyone's going back. But before you just contact our legal team so we can advise you as to some of the pros and cons about having that engagement and what to look out for. So again, if you specifically want to talk about Gurban accommodations, read the Gurban accommodation letter and then have a conversation with our legal team. The information's all right there with the letter. Great. And with that, does anyone have any last minute questions before we sign off? Give everyone a minute. Okay. All right. And with that, thank you so much. I hope you all will register for additional summer series sessions. We have a session with Sikhs in the music industry later tonight, and one on mental health right after this. So registration's still open. But Raginder and Sasha, who works on music and movies, will be presenting tonight. The mental health panelists are incredible and have done amazing work on mental health issues in the Sikh community. And then we have a couple dozen of presentations for the rest of the week. So encourage you all to sign up. And of course, our email is education@sikhcoalition.org. The link is in the chat as well. If you need anything from us, if we can be of any assistance to guide you through a very specific letter, whatever it may be, whatever asks, prep you for your meetings, we're here for that. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.